It's probably gin.
I promise you it's water. But
I'm not judging.
there's no way of you knowing.
No.
Therapist beady eye on me.
I have.
Much more professional than this, Julia. There was a man and a sofa, and it's a long story. And I had to change rooms, and I didn't have time to have my protein bar and my water before. So here I am doing it recorded in front of the nation.
Well, I in front of the nation. Well, I am so glad you got to your computer and you were 2 minutes early,
Well,
which
there you go.
is always a gift to me because I sit here thinking, are they going to come? Are they not going to come? My abandonment issues come up. But then I saw your face and I felt happy. So
I'm always 30 minutes early for everything because I hate being late. So I wish that someone could count up the hours I've spent sitting around the corner from someone's house or something, half an hour in my car. Anyway.
well, we're both children from the Navy. My dad was in the Navy, although I'm much older than you. And so I am always early, half an hour early.
Always.
I walk up and down so many streets. Also, I get lost, so I have to account for getting lost.
Being a navigator's daughter.
Okay, so your internal Google Maps.
So strong.
Mine is on chaos. Mine is on where the hell am I every day. Okay. So it's been a big couple of weeks for you, and I just wanted to appreciate you coming on the call and thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And our conversation feels very important and very relevant in how you have managed your life since a very young age, but how it's somehow there's a thread that runs through it all. And so I guess the first question I have, which I have for my guests, is what is a particular challenge you have faced or are facing?
Well, I suppose my answer to that is that's a kind of big question with what I'm facing and have recently faced, because the sort of umbrella answer to that would be having faced years of illness, and particularly recently a very debilitating illness, which has led to a lot of aloneness and isolation in many ways, and sort of devastation of my life of what it used to be. So I could just say that's the umbrella, but actually within the blessing and very heavy disguise of that aloneness and what a long-term health condition brings is how you work out how to consider who you are beyond all those things you no longer have. So actually, there are many answers I could give you, which I suppose is what my book is about, learning to be more myself and learning the things about me that were wonky and were not particularly functioning. So that then is a huge long list. So ultimately, the devastation of illness, but within that, I could give you lots of nuggets like I didn't know how to do vulnerability truly as a human. There are many ways that I didn't human very well that I had no idea. And I don't think I'm alone in that.
I feel very moved already and actually quite tearful hearing the vulnerability with which you said that answer, because it's an umbrella, but the words you used of chronic illness, devastation, isolation, all of those things individually can shatter your internal self, like every day not knowing, am I going to wake up feeling worse? How am I going to do today? How am I going to survive today? Well, if survival is your only criteria, there isn't embracing life, there isn't living, there isn't joy, there isn't love. And yet the gifts or the treasures, as you talk about in your book, you find under that, and that vulnerability was the gateway to all of them, is what I understood from your book and then from what you're saying now, because it's what you started with.
Yeah.
And you didn't know how to be vulnerable. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Well, I always thought that I could do vulnerability. I didn't really know what it meant, to be honest.
Can I pause a second?
Yeah.
Because doing vulnerability is a performance of vulnerability.
Right. There's where the comedy mask could come in, yes. So what I discovered and how I hadn't been entirely honest with myself, I realised I've just quoted the title of my book, but that's not why I said it, in all honesty, but was that I didn't realise that kind of oversharing, being silly, being free to fart in public and make a joke out of it, being the fool, although that is very much a true part, an authentic part of who I am, and I'm all about sticking two fingers up to any sort of polite convention and small talk. I always want to get to the bottom. So that is who I am. But I didn't realise that can be, like you say, a performance of, but that can hide, actually, guys, I'm feeling really scared.
Yeah.
And with that sort of, because I do have a self-confidence and certainly I don't know about self-esteem. Well, I have it now, I think, but certainly a sense of self-worth. But even that can become a mask because you then become the wise one, or you become the one that people come to for advice. But yeah, I think what I learned was that it's not human or possible or healthy to not be in touch with what could be behind that, which is actually all humans feel scared and they feel angry. And I don't like the word weak, but what kept coming up for me was this fear of portraying any kind of weakness, which I suppose is vulnerability. So that must have been a learned thing culturally for me, that you, well, for want of a better threat, I speak from the I position. I keep calm and carry on.
It's almost in your DNA, in the cultural DNA of your household, of the life that you were brought up in, that is similar to the life that I was brought up in. So I really recognize it. And I think the sort of nuance and subtlety that is complex to recognize in ourselves, and actually, as you say, what you're talking about, everybody has a version of, is you have a natural joy and exuberance and capacity to play and stick your fingers up at protocol. But somehow that felt like it became brittle. It covered other feelings that you weren't even letting yourself see, which was fragility, fury, probably. And maybe even a question like, who the hell am I? Because I can do this performing thing brilliantly. But actually, when I'm waking up at 3 a.m. or not sleeping at all, who is this Miranda?
Yeah, I think subconsciously I thought I was the one who made people laugh, put people socially at ease, gave advice, and that's who I was, and that's what you're meant to be. And you're meant to be as calm and gentle and not cause a fuss, don't get in the way, sort of thing.
Yeah, don't make a fuss.
Yeah, whatever my version of that is. Although as a comedian, you very much cause a fuss. But that was I was free to able to cause a fuss in that way. But I had no idea when I then was forced into stillness. And
that was really COVID, wasn't it?
Well, before then, really, because I started to get, COVID was the total nail in the coffin in terms of aloneness, because I shielded quite often before the word shielding existed, because with a wonky immune system, even getting a cold would set me back 6 weeks. So if someone said, "Oh, I was going to put around, but I've got a cold," I'd say sorry. So there was always a level of, for a few years before the pandemic, of being housebound or bedbound within a chronic condition. But yeah, the pandemic was the sort of final bit. So then it was, literally everything gets stripped away from you. You don't know who you are beyond that. So, and you can't, you're not in the mood to be funny or able have the energy to be funny. So I suppose I got in touch with my fragility then, and it was the biggest joy in the end. It led to joy because I finally was like, wow, I'm really angry. Am I allowed to feel this anger? Oh, I am. And then it took a few years. But now the anger and the grumpiness and the irritability I feel is just wonderful. And it just
So it's a force.
yeah, and it gets it out. And I can be grumpy about the stupidest things and not feel guilty. And my joy, therefore, is 100-fold. So I didn't realise that you can exist in this sort of middle bland ground of trying to, well, keep calm and carry on, don't cause a fuss, try and be a nice, polite girl.
Because if you think about it, or if I think about it, listening to you, is that we have this bandwidth of emotion. If you can have, say, joy and happiness one end, and fury, rage, fear the other end, if we allow the full extent of all of them, we can really enjoy the joy and express the rage, the terror.
Yeah.
But when we shut down one aspect, the rage and terror that are impolite feelings to have, they don't keep us calm, and that there was common.
Right.
Like having dirty pants almost.
Yeah.
But it also shuts down on your capacity for joy. So you're living, and it felt like your living connection got narrower and narrower. What's called in our trade the window of tolerance. So your window of tolerance became kind of paper thin.
Yeah.
And then you're locked, and you're locked in a terror with yourself.
Yeah.
For those listening that haven't read your book, which I've had great joy and actually learned a lot in reading your book, so I'm really appreciative of it.
That means an awful lot. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's full of treasure, and that you were full of treasure, and I really can see that. Do you want to take us back to what you eventually, from lots of terrible doctors, and that you find what actually led to ME?
Yeah, since I was 15. And my mother says she can remember the time where I suddenly kept saying, I've got this really strange sensation, and we couldn't describe it to doctors, but it was very common with Lyme disease, which is what it turns out it most likely was, the infection that then caused long-term effects on my immune system and disordered it, and you then get secondary complications from that. So it leads to a sort of classic ME picture, which is caused by infection and not by behavioural conditions or anxiety or stress, which I was led to believe, and so many people are, and the misunderstanding of that. That's why I'd like to have a therapy session and not do a podcast on with you, is the concept of being misunderstood. Which
because it makes you go mad. No, it's like being gaslit. I don't really like that expression because I hate tropes, but being misunderstood leads you to look at yourself and go, to scream, like, how come this is going on and you don't see it? Please.
Yeah. Well, I think the being misunderstood is actually what leads to the aloneness and then the isolation, because until you know what's going on, you don't know how to ask for help.
No.
And the level of misunderstanding is so painful that it's then too scary to ask for help, because what happens if you get platitudes? What happens if someone tries to fix you? Whereas actually, connection is just being heard. And how can you just say, I just need to tell you something, when you don't know what's going on?
So it's a sort of cycle.
It's a cycle.
It's sort of...
And then in talking about the emotions that we were, which is one of my greatest treasures that I learned, that you have to feel and experience the full range to get the joy, rather than just constantly trying to grab the joy. Is that when you finally get a diagnosis or some understanding of what's going on, you can share, you can open up, you can go, oh, no wonder. You can then experience the anger of the misdiagnosis and the misunderstood. You can. So, yeah, I think the misunderstanding is just incredibly painful and causes so much problem.
And the thing that I get as you're speaking is, if I don't have a story that makes sense to me about who I am and what I'm feeling and what's going on, I can't tell it to you for you to be with me and beside me in it. And so I just retreat into myself because I'm lost in myself, and I don't have the bridge to you, because stories are bridges, narratives are bridges. So once I give myself permission that I have, from Lyme's disease, ME, that affects my autoimmune. That means I have a dodgy immune system, which means I get every kind of infection. But once you can tell me that, I can hear that and just be, oh my goodness, that is so hard. That is a lot to live with.
Yeah. So exactly right. Once you have the story, to hear someone go, gosh, that's the healing tears flow. But also when you don't have the emotional agility that I didn't realise I didn't have, to say help, my coping mechanism before getting really ill was, I'll fix it myself. If you need a job done, you get it
Do it yourself.
and,
DIY.
Yeah. And I am a strong, practical, independent person, single most of my adult life, so it's had to be. And that's all good. Those are good traits. But when they tip over into shutting people out because you don't want to be vulnerable. So the combination, it was ridiculous.
I mean, that ridiculous is a Miranda word.
Yeah.
I would say it was overwhelmingly painful and that you were in despair. And despair is when it's really hard to live, like there's no life in your life.
Yeah, you're now making me well up, because to have that, it's still relatively recent, 3 or 4 years ago, that I was in that place. So just whenever it's acknowledged in that way, and also knowing that there are people in that place now, that breaks my heart too. What I learnt was again something that's crazy that I didn't really consciously know, was that without a sense of belonging and connection and being heard and understood, you really are, as you say, in total, you can't not be despairing and in survival mode. It's just how we're designed.
It is.
And I didn't know that. So I've had a lot of, I hope, self-compassionate grief rather than self-pitying grief. But there she goes, apologising again for feeling good. But there's a lot of grief of when you start getting some understanding or start getting some wellness, you've got the capacity to even go, that was really bad.
Because you have the perspective, because you're not in it. And so for people who are listening, and I think there will be many that are listening who see versions of themselves in your story, different, but have a chronic illness, and you were in despair, what were the moments that enabled you to begin to discover your vulnerability? Because it feels like when you're in it, you feel like you're going to live like that forever and you're just going to die on the floor. But there must have been a moment that some glimmer happened in you.
Weirdly, I think it was not the glimmer, but a worsening. So I think a final sort of collapse when my body couldn't continue, which was a few years before, gave a sort of relief that I don't have to keep pushing on.
I'm done.
I'm absolutely done. I still then had 3 or 4 years after I got a little bit stronger after that collapse. I then tried to go back to work and tried to keep pushing on because I still didn't have the diagnosis. When the diagnosis came, there was then that full, I'm done and I'm allowed to be done.
I have permission. It's like I had a temperature at school. I don't have to go to school today.
Yeah, exactly. And so I can just lie here. And then I think that allowing and that accepting and feeling that and feeling
not pushing
the despair for the first time and not pushing it away and looking back just on my own in a darkened room, because I still...
Not in therapy.
I still had light sensitivities. The curtains were drawn pretty bleak. But it was that acceptance that then weirdly, paradoxically, I felt this sort of, maybe there's a glimmer, I felt a glimmer of hope. Because there was a sort of letting go, and I thought, okay, well, I'm here and I'm breathing, and I don't think it can get worse than this. I don't think. I hope. I was scared that it could. So I've got a choice to make here. And there was just this tiny percent of me that had hope that something could change. And that's when I started reading, and when I had the energy to, and listening to wise people and thinking, okay, what do I do in this place? What do I need to learn to sit up and open the curtains and face the world? How do I help my body and mind? How do I that's the discovery I went on, which led to me putting it down on paper, because I felt like I had such great nuggets I couldn't keep them to myself.
No. That's so moving, hearing that sort of, that profound paradox, that when I finally open myself to this is as bad as it gets, and I'm not fighting it, I'm not going to be performing, I'm not putting on a show, paradoxically, your relationship with that changes, and something, just a tiny glimmer. And in your reading, I'm sure you came across post-traumatic growth, which sounds a bit like that. It's post-traumatic growth. It isn't like you have a smoothie and suddenly all shiny, bright and new, looking like Taylor Swift.
Yeah, we wish.
We wish. It's that you can name and allow the devastation of the loss that you've experienced. And from that, your perception of what life is about, who you are, what matters, changes.
Yeah, it's really helpful and interesting having somebody with your expertise mirror exactly what's happening back, because what I realised with that, facing the despair, is actually that's kindness.
Yes.
That is for yourself, going, I'm here for you, sweetheart, kind of thing. And so that's what, with this ghastly condition, I for years didn't have in doctor's surgeries or with friends and family, because I couldn't really tell them. Because after 30 years, you can't really say I'm really tired again today. You get sympathy. Understandably, I'm not shooting any of my friends or family down, but of course you shut up. So ultimately, I think it was this shard of kindness, self-compassion that gave me that hope. So there was a sort of little trail. It's all very easy to say in retrospect, isn't it? At the time, if you'd said to me, "Is there a tiny bit of hope?" I would have told you to F off.
Fuck off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you said fuck. I didn't know that was allowed.
Yes. It's not the BBC.
I know, but somehow coming from your mouth, it sounds very naughty.
It is. I love swearing. I've always loved swearing.
It's great fun.
There's the thing, you feel the pain teaches you, you get better, and it's like you choose to do the next best thing, which is good for you, which you talk about, which I think is a really good step, like choose to do the next best thing. But it can become like a pressure in itself. It can become performative.
Yeah.
And I think the key to this for people listening is not trying to perfect your I hate the word journey as well, your process, but listening to yourself and then turning to yourself with kindness. Because when you fight what's wrong with you, you're then fighting with yourself, and doing battle with yourself can only have one outcome, which is that bits of you get knocked off and bruised and punched and die.
And physically, it's exhausting. So to give up that fight, which I have to say took me years to do that. There might have been a sort of 2-minute window where I didn't fight with myself on day one of this coming out of it. But my instinct still is, this morning I felt a fatigue of old, and I was like, oh, no, my stupid body. And I was like, no, stop. It's always a constant sort of retraining. But I was going to say that what can seem trite and unhelpful, and the whole kind of well-being world, which sometimes makes me cringe a bit.
And me.
But when you're in a critical, albeit chronic situation, again, you want to tell everyone to fuck off. But for me, it was a friend who gave me these words. What's the next kindly right action?
Nice.
So I can't remember what you said, but that made it more specific. So it was
yes, that's better. I said, what's the next best thing? But actually, what's the next kindly right action is much better.
Which means that it's the next 2 minutes, the next 10 minutes. So that would be, can I open the window a little bit to start with? Could I open the window and hear some birds? Could I listen to some birds? Just the tiniest little things to remind myself that I am existing beyond a condition. Because when you're in that chronic illness condition, like we said, you're just surviving and gripping on and holding on and unknowingly angry and upset often. But you are still alive and dealing with it. So there must be another part of you. There must be another part,
a survivor,
that's also there, that can also be incredibly strong. And people say birdsong's good for the brain. It sounds effing awful and annoying, and I hate it. I wish I could go for a walk. And I'd be misunderstood 30, but that can still all go on. But okay, I'll just put some birdsong on and see. It doesn't matter in what frame you do it.
No.
Because slowly, if you kindly take the next right action, the window of tolerance you talk about open.
That's incredibly moving and touching.
Or you go, this doesn't work for me. You throw your phone away with the birdsong on and go, no, either's fine.
Either's fine. And also you can find the next kindly right action, which may be making a cup of tea.
It's always having a cup of tea. Or having a bath. Yeah, bath was always something I had looked at. There were probably a few days where I didn't have energy for a bath. But I was lucky that most days I had energy for a bath.
That gives us a picture of how devastating it is and was. And I feel very grateful for you for having the vulnerability and daring to write this down so that others may be able to take one nugget from you that could change their next 10 minutes or their next 2 minutes. But I also imagine it's quite a demand on your compromise system coming out in a way, in this way. So your title, I haven't been entirely honest with you. And really I haven't been entirely honest with myself, but also we now know more about you and it changes our picture of you from a public perspective. And that must be hard to internally navigate.
Yeah, look at my shoulders. I'm like,
I know.
I'm cringing. I'm turning everything in. I'm just like, people know more about me that I don't necessarily want to share.
But we can all have an ambivalent relationship with that, of wanting people to know and not wanting people to know, can't we?
I just felt that I couldn't. Well, there was something you said earlier and I thought, that's one of the biggest treasures. I can't remember now. How annoying. But it was around the concept of having needs, which I talk about in the book, going, oh gosh, now I've got needs. This British person didn't realise they had needs. And you have to know yourself and what your needs are to ask for help. I can't remember the connection to why I was going to mention that.
Because the relationship we had with you up until this book was published on the same day as Boris Johnson's, Unleashed. Is it Unleashed or Leashed? I can't remember.
Unleashed.
Maybe it should have been Leashed.
Well, I said on the Graham Norton show that I think our titles should swap. Because I am unleashing myself and the new me being able to be vulnerable back into society. And the other sort speaks for itself.
Yes, that is hilarious. I love that.
Yes, so I am no longer on a leash. But that is what it felt like, actually. Not being a human without vulnerabilities and needs and boundaries and understanding who you are is like being on a leash.
Yeah.
It's completely...
You're completely boxed in.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. You said that the last couple of weeks must have been difficult with sort of working more on a compromised system and not...
Immune.
Not full energy returned yet, and the vulnerability of it. Well, I tell you what has helped me is the needs thing, is learning what my needs is. So I have such a great team behind me of publishers and agents, and then I'm blessed now to have a husband and a very lovely assistant who's also a friend. And so we've got this little team, and I am just absolutely clear on what I need. So literally the time, in a way I never was before. But
amazing.
Maybe I didn't need to do as much before, but I'm like, I will arrive at this time and I will like half an hour on my own. And then I will do this. And then, you want me to sign some books? Okay, that'll be at 5:30 because I will want to rest then. And then I'll eat now. And so
amazing.
And in the past, I would have been embarrassed. I would have thought, people think I'm a diva, or
I'm being difficult, a difficult woman,
and demanding, and all that. And I think I still probably apologise occasionally, or sort of constantly. And the publicist at my publisher's going, "It is fine, thank you very much, but you don't need to keep thanking me." But it's just so joyous that when you actually say, in an authentic way, because you're not being demanded. This is what I need.
It's clear. But it's such a relief for everybody else. There's clarity.
Yeah, and people
they go, okay, you're going to arrive at 5. You need half an hour. I'll give you a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Then you're going to do your shtick.
Yeah.
Then you're going to go home.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
And
Fabulous.
now I know that you're looking after yourself, and I know exactly where I am and what I've needed. And it's so much kinder.
Such a relief, though.
Constant sort of creeping around each other. Are you sure? Do you want to do that? Well, I can't. No, you say. All that, I can't. I'm unleashed. I can't do it anymore.
So can I hear a little bit? I've gone ahead of myself. I do want to hear about your lovely new husband.
Yes.
And how exciting it is.
Because I had a few before. I sounded like he's the 6th or something.
But he's freshly minted. There is something very lovely about a freshly minted husband,
yes,
rather than an old codger. So I'm a little bit jealous, although I get that it's nice to have had an old codger a long time. But can you be as clear and authentic in asking for your needs to be met with, say, your mum, with your husband, with your friends? Can you set boundaries of time, of, no, I can't? Do you have a good no with everybody now?
Yes, I do. I really do. I can honestly say that I do. I'm very good at saying no. Sometimes there'll be pangs of guilt with some friends who maybe don't understand. You're always going to get misunderstood in your sort of boundaries and needs. And then I remember reading Brené Brown saying, or hearing her say, boundaries are the distance that we love people from. And
so
that
good.
Just freed me up so much to go, I know this friend I can only see once a year. It's not as prescriptive as
no, of course not.
And that's she's just not someone I can be with every day or whatever.
No.
But it's not as premeditated as that. But yes, because I met my husband when I was beginning this sort of discovery of needs and emotions and boundaries and wasn't fully well yet, it was actually such an easy place to then be completely honest and authentic from myself from the start, because it wasn't like I was able to go put on makeup and go on a date and do any sort of pretending. So we had a very honest, easy sort of meeting and relationship from the start. And we laugh about them as well. Like he'll say something like, I can't think of an example.
What's his name?
Richard. And I was going, no, no, I'm not doing that. And he'll laugh, and I'm not doing it in a to get a laugh way. He was like, right, okay, that's very clear. But it's just a very easy, fun relationship with those sort of needs and boundaries and clarity and asking for help and being that vulnerable. I've never had that sort of connection before, I don't think.
What a joy. What an
I've
absolute...
had loads of really close friends and still do, I hasten to add. And our connections are getting better and better because of what I've learned. And I think since the diagnosis, they've been amazing because they understand. And I can just explain it. I live in a body that's doing 2 or 3 days work at the moment, but that means I can't socialise until I've had 4 days rest, sort of thing. So it's boring and we all have to be patient. But
I love the expression, I'm living in a body that. That's such a permission-giving expression. And it goes away from the sort of I'm sick narrative to like, this is what my body is. It's very accurate. But also I love the sort of thing about come for supper, come at 7, leave at 8:30.
Yes. Well, this is, again, blessing in a very hefty disguise of having an energy sapping condition. And again,
I think we all want it though, don't we? Well, we all want this.
It's funny because the amount of times people say, but that's me. The amount of people say I'm exhausted to me when I say, oh, I can't do that, because then they go, do you really say that? Can you really say that to people you don't know? And I say, yeah, because I have to. But actually, maybe I wasn't doing it before because I didn't know that I could. And that partly could have been why I was so exhausted, or the sort of joy was slowly sapping from my life and I wasn't, because I wasn't meeting my needs or my boundaries. But yes, a friend who runs a business said to me, I've got to go out to dinner with all our sort of corporate sponsors and everything. And I'm just so tired. I just couldn't think, I can't think anything work. I said, well, do you have to go? And her eyes immediately widened. She went, of course I have to go. And I went, well, do you? She said, well, I'm running the thing. I arranged it. I said, well, let's put a pin in that. And then she said, what would you do? I said, genuinely, I'm not just saying this. I would go and I would say, it's so lovely that you're here. You're so important to me and my business. Can I just check, do we all want to be here at this 3-course dinner? Or there was like a tasting menu or something, so it was going to go on and on forever.
Forever.
And she's like, you wouldn't. And I said, I absolutely would. And I guarantee 8 out of 10 of those people would say, please, can I go home? And then just say, let's have a chat next week. Let's meet for a cup of tea. And her eyes, she literally thought I'd said something, I don't know what.
Speaking from a different point.
Yeah. She's like, I don't believe that you would say that. And I said, well, I'd love to be tested because I think I would.
Yeah.
So there she went along and had to do this dinner. And
being polite has a lot against it. There's a lot for it, like being considerate to others, but that kind of over politeness that we all start faking it is so destructive.
Well, it becomes unkind. Kindness is the key. But actually, when you start going, it's fine for me to come. No, I'll come to you, whatever. When you're absolutely exhausted, so I want to hear that you're exhausted so I can help you. Yeah. And I can talk to you and look after you.
And I'll bring my lasagna.
And I'll bring my, that I won't have made from some establishment.
Exactly. Can I ask you about how your parents have responded to your book?
Do you know, I haven't actually seen them since, I suppose I should add, I don't know whether this is necessary for your podcast, but this is going out much later than, we're recording this earlier, so in case people think, gosh, she doesn't see her parents very often. But it's having it only just been published and doing some publicity, and I haven't had time to see them and talk about it. I don't think they've finished reading it yet, or even begun, I don't know. I really hate sending it to friends and family. Like, I never tell them when I'm on the telly or doing something, and they're always like, why didn't I would have loved to watch that? And I just prefer it to be my job in many ways. So yeah.
What's that about?
Well, my first response is I genuinely don't think it's about more than it is, but it might be. I'm open to that because it is my job. So when you've done the job or worked really hard at the job and then it's sort of out there, you're sort of moving on to the next thing. And also, being someone of tired disposition, that's not the right word. What would be the word? Highly sensitive, I suppose. Yeah, just somebody who needs lots of alone time. I find it quite sapping to sort of have constant conversations of, so what's Graham Norton like? Or what's Patricia Hodge like? Your job is to watch it if you want to and switch off if you don't.
It's a boundary.
Yeah, I think I just find it a bit boring. I love talking about myself in some instances, this being a good one. And then other times I find it really dull.
Yeah. I just wondered if you were my child and I read that book, I'd have a lot of feels about how come I didn't know that. Yes,
and so maybe my response is partly a worry of what they might think, or there's certainly concern that they might misunderstand that anything is of their doing, which from the book
couldn't be more clear that it isn't.
Couldn't be more clear that absolutely that's not. I didn't delve into my childhood. I didn't particularly need to. There were some obvious things from my mother's. She would agree with me that we keep calm and carry on.
And like when your dad was in the Falklands and all of that, she really did keep calm and carry on. And so it was role modeled for you in a way that it was role modeled for all of us from the war, wasn't it? That you don't sometimes keep calm and carry on is the right response. It just isn't a universal one for all of life. It's just like, for this particular thing, it's useful.
Yeah.
For this other thing, let's not be calm and carry on. Let's have a complete hissy fit.
And also, I'm really grateful to them that I've learnt what duty and honour and resilience and ultimately kindness, and if you say yes, you go unless you're dying.
Commitment.
All that. I'm very grateful to be brought up with that. But as you get older and you see your parents as people, not just your parents, and through what I've discovered in recent years about who I am, I had no idea that HSP, highly sensitive people, existed until I read that book. And then I went, my father's probably quite sensitive, but not on the scale. My mother, not. We're just completely different people.
You're
Or
different
she's
people.
never going to understand that, I have a weep pretty much every day, certainly every other day, usually a weep of joy. But sometimes my husband will find me just sitting at the kitchen table, and he's got used to it now, because normally he'd rush in, oh my gosh, are you all right? No, I'm just letting something go from I'm absolutely fine. It's great. It'll be over in 5 minutes. And so now he comes in and goes, hello, and just the tears are pouring down. It doesn't even bat an eyelid. But my mother
It's the weather.
understood that.
No. It's lovely that he can. And it's lovely that you can. It's like letting the weather be the weather. It's like, oh, this is my weather.
Yeah. And my mother understands it now. We laugh about it now, because I'm going to say unleashed again, because I think our relationship is probably going to get much better because I'm freely who I am, and she can respond to that rather than me just being a teenager going, you're so annoying and you don't understand.
Yeah. We need to come to an end. And I know that you have time boundaries, as I do.
I hope you mean just podcast-wise, not just we're about to come to our mortal
extinction.
Ends.
No, I'm not talking about our mortal end. I'm talking about the end of this recording. I've completely lost what I was going to say now.
I'm so sorry. That's really annoying. Comedians do that. They see a vague hint of a joke and they jump in and it ruins everything. And it's not even that funny.
It was funny. There's a relational aspect of I need to know myself so that you can know me. Well, you're talking about your mum. Now that you understand yourself better, she'll understand you better, and vice versa. And I think it can be thought of as binary, that I have to understand myself and then you can understand me. And actually, I think it's relational and process oriented, that you can sometimes help me understand myself because you can see things like, do you know that thing called the Johari window? The bit of yourself that you don't know, that nobody knows, but there's a bit of yourself that you don't know, but other people know, and they give you feedback. And there's a bit that you all know. And I think you're beginning to understand yourself in deepening and relational ways now that you've started the process of being open to what's going on in you. It's the attitude, and then that changes.
Yeah.
Have I got that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And also, when you start being more honesty and connection, you learn things about yourself that you don't particularly like. You want to change. You think, wow, if I've responded like that to like that, that's what I've done to myself all these years. I want to change that for both. So yeah, and actually talking about my mum and do you know the Enneagram?
Of course I know the bloody Enneagram. I'm a therapist. How could I not know the Enneagram?
All right. Now, something about being defensive you want to talk about. Well, I was always a bit skeptical about any sort of personality test things, but I had a few friends who would talk about Enneagram and how brilliant it was, and I kept doing it, and then it kept coming back with something. I thought that's not quite right, and then I couldn't answer some questions A or B. I thought, well, I'm a bit of both, and it was really annoying me. And my friend was sitting back being quiet about it because she knew she'd seen this with many people who the type of Enneagram I am, it happens to a lot. Anyway, I thought, I'm going to do this with my mother, which felt quite vulnerable. So I said to her, there are these 144 questions all about me. Do you mind? She went, okay, then. And there were some things so I said, am I gloomy and stroppy, or am I something irritable and whatever? And I thought it was irritable. And she went, oh, you're so gloomy and stroppy. I was like, am I? Oh, and then I sat with her and I went, oh my God, I really am. She said, oh, yes, you're so melancholic. You're just very dramatic. I was like, yes, I am. Brilliant. And so doing it with her was so helpful. And I finally found my Enneagram number, which was so helpful. I think it
really does.
Guess what I am. Guess what I am.
I don't know.
You obviously don't know the Enneagram well enough. 4.
I don't know well enough to know what 4 is.
To be fair, if I was with a therapist and they said, do you know your Enneagram number? I'd probably leave the room, because I'd be like, I want you to read me and listen to me, not be done by numbers. So I think I feel even better about you now.
Miranda, this has been such a lovely conversation. Thank you for being so open and vulnerable with me and with our listeners.
Hark at me being able to be vulnerable.
Hark at you being able to be vulnerable. Is there anything else that you want them to know or say?
No, I think Hark at Me being vulnerable is quite a nice way to end.
It's a lovely way to end. Do you want to tell us all about your book as well?
My book is called I Haven't Been Entirely Honest With You, which, as you cleverly clocked onto, is ultimately I haven't been entirely honest with myself. So it's about my adventure, despite chronic illness, to work out who I truly was, truly am, truly am beyond all the worldly shouts, all the worldly measurements of success, all the ways the world tells us we should look and be, and finding out traits about myself that weren't truly who I am, from people pleasing to whatever. And I now feel free and have a life of joy and meaning. And so that's what the story is about.
That's a wonderful story.
And if it helps, if anyone else feels leashed and unfree in themselves and feel like they can't state their wants and their needs and be who they truly are, then I really hope there's some treasures in there that help
There
them.
really are treasures in there that will help them. And it's a wonderful book. And this is a wonderful conversation. I have loved meeting you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my, what are you?
Children? Therapists?
Women?
Colleagues?
Yeah. You're not my peers. Anyhow, wherever you are, we're going to talk about Miranda, which was a fantastic conversation. Can I start with my bit first?
Yeah.
Since I'm in charge.
Since you're not our peer.
I don't know what a frigging Enneagram is. I've looked it up since. I thought she was talking about a genogram. So I was like so confident. I know what a genogram is.
Yes.
And then she talked to me about numbers 4, and I was literally... And so I've looked it up now, and it is like a personality test. It's a bit like Myers-Briggs, and it gives you type of personalities. But I have literally never heard of it ever in my whole life. So
I had heard of it, but I'd never done it. And I looked it up, and I was like, scrolling through the different numbers, and I was like, I think I might be number 9. I still haven't done the test. I looked at number 9, and I was like, I think that is exactly me. And what really bummed me out about that was that it has pictures of famous people at the top, or well-known characters or fictional characters, and it had Jane Bennett. My heart sank because I was like, I remember, whenever I love Pride and Prejudice, and I've always thought I'd love to be Elizabeth Bennet. I think I'm probably Jane. And that's that's shit. And I've always thought Emily's like Elizabeth Bennet. She's quite funny and quick. And I was like, bummer. Now the Enneagram's validated my own fear.
And I'm Mrs. Bloody Bennet.
It's not done a scan of my face and said I look hot. It's saying, you're so conciliatory. It's got the peacemaker.
That's nice, though, no? It's nice to be a peacemaker.
That's my personal self-inner critic going, damn.
Anyway,
sorry.
I got hoisted by my Enneagram petard, if that's such a thing.
I did think when I was listening to it, you sounded rather confident about an Enneagram, and I was like, does she know? Does she know?
She bloody doesn't. But let's talk about Miranda. She's amazing.
Listen, I'm sure like many people could listen to Miranda all day, and probably people listening to the podcast are a bit disappointed now they've got me and Soph, and much prefer to keep listening to Miranda. I really loved what she said about not human. She said I didn't human very well.
Very well.
It's a lovely phrasing of it, but it sort of made me think about how we talk a lot about mental illness and not that much about mental wellness. Like, what does it really mean to be mentally well? And maybe we should be thinking more about how to human well rather than what happens when you're not humaning well. And I think if you're sort of interested in that as an idea, Dan Siegel, who I talked a lot about on this podcast.
I'm a big fan too.
He does a lot on mental wellness, and I really like images that make things really tangible. And he talks about mental wellness really as thinking about mental wellness is thinking about integration, and sort of integration of your brain and your body, but also integration with relationships and the world around you. And if you go on his website, there's something called the Mental Wellness Platter, and it has like little dishes on it. And one of them's like sleep time, downtime, connecting time. I can't remember what the other ones are. Essentially, like these different sort of platters that feed your mental wellness, that allow you to maybe think about
nurturing your humaning.
It also, it's a nice metaphor, isn't it, for thinking like, why don't we let ourselves eat from certain platters? You know, that sometimes we have access to them in theory, but we don't let ourselves have them, and why that might be. And I was thinking about Miranda when she was talking about how she's got this sort of glorious newfound capacity to state her needs. Like she's giving herself permission, I guess, to take what she needs from that platter. That's a funny word.
Set boundaries.
Yes, and I was just before I was coming on here, I was listening to Therapist Uncensored, which is a podcast I love, and they were talking about aggression, and aggression not as anger, but as an energy, as a life force for seeking desire. It can be constructive and it can be destructive. And thinking about it in the context of Miranda, of that kind of having that life force to claim your needs, because she was talking about how difficult that has been for her and how stuff around her chronic illness has made her feel that she isn't really entitled to say what she needs. She's just being weak. And I guess that resonated for me, probably personally, of like, oh yeah, sometimes it can be hard to assert yourself in a way, but actually it's much cleaner for everybody when you do.
I'm guessing.
Yeah. And when it's done from a place of that sort of assertiveness as opposed to this angry version of aggression.
The other thing that it brought up for me was being the one that is different in a family. And I think probably in all families, certainly in our families, with different constellations at different times, different members feel more kind of outside what you see as the norm. And so that she was highly sensitive in the way that she was brought up, a lot to do with the context of the time that she was brought up. Being sensitive, it wasn't even acknowledged, it wasn't understood. That's a better way of saying it. And so I was thinking, for people listening, are there aspects of you in your family where you feel that it isn't allowed, you're not allowed to be this, you're not allowed to be that, and then that's formed part of your identity of there's something wrong with me, or I'm not enough, or... And I think that's quite an interesting way of thinking about it. It fits a bit to your dishes too.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I think it's a really interesting thing, because I think as a child, there's not a sort of conscious awareness of that, is there? Mum, you're quite an extrovert, social, you're really good at talking to people. And our older sister, not on this podcast, is also very, very sociable and very extrovert. And both of you are really good at just connecting with people and talking to people that you don't know. I had this really clear memory as a child of thinking that like one day I was going to wake up and just be different, that I was going to suddenly sort of turn into you and suddenly just be in a big group of people and really know what to say and feel really, really comfortable. And I remember having this realization, probably at about 20, quite old, that I was like, oh, no, I'm never going to be like that. I have my own things that maybe I find easier than them, but I'm never going to be someone who just like can find that particular thing easy. Like I can learn how to do it fine, and I have learned how to do it fine, but I am just different. And it took me so long to just realize like, oh no, you're not going to turn into that. You're not doing anything wrong by being somebody who spends a lot of time to party in the loo. You're just different.
I have to sit on myself to stop myself saying, that's not true, Em. That's not true, Em.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. I didn't succeed.
You sat on yourself and said it anyway.
Yeah.
But I had that same question I wrote in my notes, for a question for Emily, I guess, it was in my mind, was the challenge of parenting children who are different from you and the challenge of parenting children who are more similar to you. And it made me think in adult terms a bit like languages of love, of like often giving your children what you think maybe that you would want to receive, but actually if your child is really different to you, they're going to want to receive it maybe in a different way or a different level of attunement. And that process of attunement, having to have that capacity to get a sense of how you're being experienced by your child and that giving you feedback, right? And how confused it can be when you project onto your child too. I mean, I'm thinking of me and my own children here.
I think there's an idea that if your children are the same as you, that you will kind of meet their needs because you see them clearly as yourself. And when they're different to you, you might not. You might project onto them your needs rather than their needs. But I think there's an added complication is that when your children are like you, there's that Carl Jungian idea that what you most don't like about other people is what is most unresolved in yourself. And so that can be an added difficulty.
And also that they might be similar to you, but they will also be different to you.
Exactly.
So then I think sometimes when you over-identify, you have an assumption about something that may not be true, that doesn't always give your child space to be different, to be themselves. And even if they're similar, they will also be different.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's the key thing. Shall we connect back to Miranda?
Yes. I think obviously the other really big thing, that sort of double whammy of chronic illness alongside not being believed and not being validated. So you start thinking, oh, well, there must be something wrong with me. I must be crazy, sort of doubting yourself. And I actually remember there was a girl in my year at school when I was 14, 15, that kind of age, who had ME. And I remember us being told that there was a psychological illness that she had. And that's such a sort of mind fuck, isn't it? To be told this very physical experience that you're having, and not to say that there are mind-body connections, but that sort of invalidation that also then sort of puts something on you, like you must be doing something to create
and
this
adds
pain.
to your inflammation, right? It adds to it. You get more chronic.
The implication when people say it's psychological or psychosomatic, as people used to say, is that you have control over it in a way that if you're ill, you don't. And when I was listening to her, I was resonating with friends I know who've struggled, and how it adds this whole other emotional labor to what is already incredibly hard, and mistrust of doctors and fearful of seeking out help in the way that Miranda talked about because of not being believed. And then if you do take the risk, having to digest the pain of if it goes wrong, it's this whole other thing. I also, though, had a friend tell me once, and I was really like, oh, that's fascinating, who has struggled with chronic fatigue, that it also became an incredible teacher for them because she didn't have the capacity to do things that drained energy from her. So the things that made her unhappy, she just couldn't do because it was too exhausting to do stuff that went against her needs. And that sort of meant that she actually got to know herself incredibly well about actually what she did want and what she didn't want. And it was...
that was true of Miranda and why she wrote the book, wasn't it?
Like at some point, her body just took over and said, no, you can't fight this. You can't fake this. You can't solve it by yourself. And I think also, to add to what you were saying, Soph, is also that experience of not being believed, being kind of invalidated, and then this transformative experience of finally finding somebody who like recognizes and acknowledges your experience. And I think many women have had that with endometriosis, or that sort of a alternative version of really unbearable pain that has been minimized, or sort of, oh yes, it's just period pain. And then finally finding a doctor, finding a practitioner who really gets it.
I mean, the things I also loved in the pod or our conversation was her spontaneous humor. And I mean, I really laughed out loud, and I could hear it when I was listening back to lots of points. And when she reversed her book title with Boris Johnson.
Yeah, I really laughed out loud then. It was very funny.
I thought that was just so clever and so funny. And she had a lot of other conversations with other podcasts. I actually think we had a really good one. And I think, not being competitive or anything,
I think ours was the best.
I think ours was the best. I actually don't think it was the best, but I thought it was really good.
And now you know something about Enneagrams that you didn't before.
Something, not much.
You know the non-Enneagrams.
Yeah. Thank you.